Today's papers are full of the furore surrounding the publication of the so-called Black Spider Memos. These are the letters that Prince Charles wrote to ministers between 2004 and 2005, called Black Spider Memos because the Prince writes with very scrawled handwriting in a black fountain pen. This has been going on for 10 years. The Guardian newspaper led the quest to have these letters published in the public interest, saying that they shouldn't be kept secret and essentially accusing Charles of lobbying ministers. Well, what have they ended up saying? They haven't said anything that surprising. Indeed, Prince Charles has made no secret of his views over the last 45 decades since he turned 21 and has been the longest serving heir apparent in history. We know that he's opposed, for instance, to modern architecture. We know that he's supportive of organic farming, and indeed some of the letters refer to agricultural issues such as the beef crisis and British beef being promoted across the world. Equally, as a future head of the armed forces, the military is one of Charles's chief bugbears, and there's letters he wrote there to the Secretary of State suggesting that the troops on the ground in Iraq weren't armoured properly, weren't in the right helicopters, didn't have the right equipment. Again, that's him in his capacity as a colonel-in-chief of several regiments, but also as the dad of a prince who went out and fought in Afghanistan. Other issues he's raised, herbal medicine. Again, some people think these are quite kooky views. He thinks alternative therapies should be promoted more on the NHS. He's courted a lot of controversy for that by doctors saying it's just quack medicine and it doesn't help anyone, they're just placebos. So on one hand, you've got this situation where the Prince has been talking about issues and they've been shrouded in secrecy, whereas he's never made his views secret. He's always been outspoken, so nothing has come out of these letters that are that surprising. Some of the subject matter ranges from the sublime to the ridiculous. He's in one letter trying to champion the fate of the albatross, and in another talking about a Patagonian toothfish and how we should all be aware of that plight too. Probably quite fringy concerns. There's also one letter in which he talks about Shackleton's hut and in the Antarctic and how it should be preserved because at the end of the day it was a very significant expedition. So on one hand we've got Charles championing causes that others haven't, and he divides opinion because there are people who think he's got a right to meddle, he's been heir to the throne for all these years, what was he meant to do? He's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. And then there's others that think that he's overstepping his constitutional duty. He should be like his mother, the Queen, who has been unwavering in her impartiality. I think personally your opinion on whether Charles should meddle or not largely depends on whether you agree with his views. There'll be some in the farming community saying, thank goodness somebody's speaking up for us. And we actually saw that with the floods in Somerset in the southwest last year. It was Prince Charles, was it not, who was the first to turn up there in Wellingtons and really address the residents when people from the Environment Agency didn't seem to be able to cut through to the people who were worst affected. I think we've got two issues. Should he meddle? And equally, if he does meddle, should there be transparency? As a journalist, I'll obviously always be arguing in favour of disclosure. My opinion is, I don't mind the Prince being outspoken. It makes for better headlines, but if you've got something to say, then let's hear it. And I'm not talking about private correspondence, about private matters. He writes to an old aunt to share views of memories of the coronation. That's different. If he's writing to ministers on affairs of state, then it is arguably in the public interest to find out. What's most ironic about the Guardian's victory is that it is a Pyrrhic victory. It's half-baked because on one hand it's great we've had this disclosure and we've all pored over these letters, but on the other, new freedom of information rules mean that royal letters can't be subject to access requests. We can't see future correspondence. This also does beg the question, all right, Prince Charles is expressing his views to ministers, that's fine, but maybe these letters should be a bit more few and far between. He's been so prolific, 27 letters in just that short space of time between 2004 and 2005. How many other letters has he written? Is he writing 3 letters a week? For ministers who obviously have to give a very polite response, and indeed it should be noted that Charles's letters are the epitome of good manners and quite humble actually in their nature. Ministers might be thinking, look, we're quite willing to listen to your views as future king, but perhaps don't bombard us with so much snail mail. If there's anything to come out of this story, at least reminds us of the lost art of the letter. One wonders if this had been quite such a romantic story had it been Prince Charles's emails rather than his handwritten notes in the scrawled handwriting that of course has lent them their name.